$513 billion. That is what one family is worth today. Not a corporation, not a fund, one family. The Waltons, and they got there by selling things like dish soap, tube socks, and garden hoses to people who needed to spend less money. That's it. That's the whole business model. No tech disruption, no algorithm, no secret financial instrument. Just an obsession with low prices, applied at a scale so enormous that it physically reshaped the American landscape and eventually the global economy. Sam Walton started with a single variety store in Newport, Arkansas. He was 27 years old. He had borrowed money from his father-in-law. The store was not his idea. He had franchised it from somebody else. How does a man go from a borrowed store in a town most Americans can't find on a map to the largest company on earth? And how does his family, 3 generations later, still hold the wheel so tightly that no investor, no activist fund, no board maneuver has ever come close to loosening their grip? That's what this video answers. Stay until chapter 7 because the number at the beginning of this video is not the most surprising part. What the Walton family did in 1985 to make sure that number could never be taken from them is, what city are you watching from? Write it in the comments. And if you're new here, subscribe, like, and share this video. It helps a lot more than you can imagine. Sam Walton's first store was taken from him, not by a competitor, not by a recession, by a lease clause he hadn't read carefully enough. After 5 years of building the most successful variety store in Newport, Arkansas, tripling its sales, turning it into something remarkable, his landlord exercised an option to buy the building and handed it to his own son. Walton walked away with nothing but the lessons. He was 32 years old. No store, no location, starting over. Most people would have found a safer path. He found a smaller town. He moved to Bentonville, Arkansas, population 3,000, and opened Walton's 5 and Dime. Nobody thought it was a strategic choice. It was. He had learned that small towns were underserved, that landlords in tiny markets had less leverage, and that if you gave rural customers the prices they deserved, they would drive past every competitor to reach you. Losing that first store turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to Walmart. Because if the Newport landlord hadn't pushed Walton out, Walton might have stayed comfortable, stayed local. The humiliation of that loss became the fuel that built everything else. The most expensive education Sam Walton ever got cost him a store, and he spent the next 40 years making sure the lesson compounded. Every major retail chain in America told Sam Walton his idea would never work. 1962. Walton approached the leadership of Ben Franklin's stores, the franchise he had been operating under, with a proposal. Open large discount stores in small rural towns, price everything lower than anyone else. The volume would compensate for the margin. They said no. Conventional wisdom said discount retail only worked in big cities, where foot traffic could justify the scale. He had no backing, no franchise partner, and no proof the model worked anywhere. Just a conviction that the experts were wrong about where poor people lived and what they needed. Walton opened the first Walmart in Rogers, Arkansas, in 1962. The same year, Kmart and Target launched entirely with family money. No outside investors, no institutional backing. He and his wife Helen drove the roads of Arkansas themselves, counting cars in parking lots of competing stores to understand customer behavior at a level no consultant had bothered to reach. The experts weren't wrong about the math. Discount retail did require volume. What they missed was that rural customers, given the option, would generate that volume enthusiastically. Walmart's first stores outperformed projections, not because the strategy was revolutionary, but because nobody had bothered to try it where the customers actually were. The biggest market opportunities in history have almost always been hiding in the places the experts decided weren't worth looking. Walmart didn't beat its competitors on price. It beat them on information 20 years before anyone called it a data strategy. By the 1980s, Walmart had built a satellite communication network, connecting every store to its Arkansas headquarters in real time. Every sale, every inventory movement, every supplier shipment, tracked, analyzed, and acted on faster than any competitor could respond. Most retailers of that era operated on gut instinct and monthly reports. By the time a store manager in Ohio knew he was running low on a product, the opportunity was often already lost. Walton invested hundreds of millions of dollars in technology infrastructure at a time when most retail executives considered that category of spending absurd. The system he built, which eventually became the foundation of what we now recognize as modern supply chain management, allowed Walmart to replenish products faster, waste less inventory, and squeeze costs out of every single transaction at a scale that made competitors' margins look like rounding errors. Walmart's famous low prices were never really about being cheap. They were about being efficient. The savings passed to customers were the visible result of an invisible war on waste that Walton waged every single day for 4 decades inside his own operation. Walmart didn't win on price. It won on information. The low prices were just what winning looked like from the outside. By 1985, Sam Walton was the richest man in America. He drove a 1979 Ford F-100 pickup truck with bird dogs in the back and a coffee can on the seat. Forbes put him on the cover. He was reportedly annoyed. The wealthiest individual in the United States was getting his hair cut at a barbershop in Bentonville, Arkansas, for $7. This was not performance. This was not carefully constructed PR. This was just Sam Walton. Walton genuinely believed that personal extravagance was a form of theft from the business. Every dollar he spent on himself was a dollar that could lower a price for a customer or fund a new store. He flew coach until the company was enormous. He shared hotel rooms with executives on business trips. He insisted that every Walmart truck driver be treated with the same respect as a senior vice president because he understood that the truck drivers were the ones actually keeping the shelves stocked. Walton's frugality wasn't modesty, it was strategy. A CEO who lives simply signals to an entire organization that waste is unacceptable at every level. His personal behavior set a cultural standard that cascaded through hundreds of thousands of employees and billions of dollars in operational decisions every single year. The richest man in America became the richest man in America by behaving like money wasn't the point, which is, of course, precisely why it kept arriving. When Walmart went public in 1970, it created more millionaires per square mile in Northwest Arkansas than almost any IPO in history. Not Silicon Valley founders, not hedge fund managers, store managers, truck drivers, administrative assistants, people who had taken their small option grants and simply never sold. In 1970, Walmart had 38 stores and annual revenues of $31 million. It was a regional retailer with no national profile and no reason to attract institutional attention. The IPO raised less than $5 million. Most Wall Street analysts didn't cover it. Over the next 2 decades, Walmart stock split 11 times. An investment of $1,000 in the 1970 IPO would have been worth over $500,000 by the time Sam Walton died in 1992. Employees who had held their shares through every split, through every moment of doubt, through every analyst who said the growth couldn't continue, woke up wealthy in a town that still had one traffic light. The greatest wealth creation story of the Walmart IPO wasn't the Walton family. It was the employees who trusted the company enough to hold. Walton had structured profit sharing and stock options for associates, a radical idea in 1970 retail, specifically because he believed that people who owned a piece of what they were building would build it better. The most powerful retention strategy Sam Walton ever invented was also the most powerful wealth creation strategy his employees ever encountered. Same instrument, 2 different purposes, both worked perfectly. Walmart didn't just change retail, it changed where things are made. By the late 1990s, Walmart's purchasing power was so enormous that suppliers didn't set their prices, Walmart set them. And the only way to meet Walmart's price demands was to manufacture somewhere cheaper than anywhere in the United States. In 1985, Walmart ran a Buy American campaign. Sam Walton genuinely preferred domestic suppliers. He toured factories. He talked to workers. The campaign was not cynical, but the math eventually won. As Walmart's scale grew, the pressure it placed on supplier margins became relentless. Companies that supplied Walmart faced a choice: cut costs dramatically or lose access to the largest retail channel on earth. One by one, supply chains shifted. Factories moved. The Buy American signs quietly came down. Walmart didn't create the globalization of manufacturing, but it accelerated it by at least a decade. Every purchasing decision made by a buyer in Bentonville rippled through supply chains on 3 continents. The company that started selling to people who needed to spend less money ended up reshaping the global economy of the people who made the things it sold. At a certain scale, a business stops responding to the market. It starts creating one. Walmart crossed that line sometime in the 1990s, and nobody fully understood what that meant until it was already done. Before Sam Walton died, he made one decision that guaranteed his family would control Walmart forever. And most people have never heard of it. This is the chapter the CTA was pointing at. Here it is. Walton had taken Walmart public in 1970. Public companies, by definition, belong to their shareholders. As Walmart grew, institutional investors accumulated enormous positions. Activist funds became powerful. The theoretical threat of a hostile takeover, or simply of shareholder pressure, forcing strategic changes the family opposed, was real. In the early 1980s, Sam and Helen Walton transferred the vast majority of their Walmart shares into a series of family-controlled entities, trusts, and holding structures specifically designed to keep voting control inside the bloodline, regardless of what outside shareholders did. The structure was built with 2 goals: minimize the state taxes across generations, and make it mathematically impossible for any outside force to accumulate enough votes to override the family. It worked on both counts. Today, the Walton family controls approximately 46% of Walmart's outstanding shares through Walton Enterprises and a network of family trusts. In a company worth over $400 billion in market capitalization, that stake represents an unbreakable voting bloc. No activist investor, no institutional coalition, no proxy fight has ever come close to threatening it. Now that you know how this empire was locked, do you think the Walton family's control structure is brilliant long-term thinking, or does it come at a cost that shareholders and employees ultimately pay? Drop your verdict in the comments. I read every single one. Sam Walton built the largest retail company in the world. Then he built the cage around it. The cage was the smarter achievement. Sam Walton built a $500 billion empire by refusing to do anything the way anyone told him it should be done. He opened stores where experts said there were no customers. He invested in technology when retailers said technology was not retail. He stayed poor when the world was watching to see how he'd spend his wealth. He structured his family's ownership so tightly that 3 generations later, no outside force has managed to introduce so much as a crack. Here's what this story looks like from a distance, and why it is not what it seemed at the beginning of this video. $513 billion sounds like the story of a man who won, and it is. But it is also the story of a man who lost his first store to a lease clause, who was rejected by every major chain in America, who spent his entire life behaving as though the empire he was building might disappear tomorrow. The paranoia was the engine. The frugality was the discipline. The obsession with control was the architecture that made it permanent. So here is the verdict I want to leave you with, and it is directed at you, not at the Waltons. At what point in building something do you stop optimizing for growth and start building the structure that protects what you've already made? Sam Walton asked that question in 1982. Most founders never ask it. Think about that. Next video. $513 billion is an extraordinary number. The next empire we're covering started with even less than a variety store in Arkansas and ended with a family that controls not a retail chain but an entire government. The number is different. The obsession with control is exactly the same. It drops this week. Subscribe. It is free. And the next verdict might be the most extreme one we have covered on this channel yet. See you in the next one.